So this is my current PC. Now, it's no longer considered to be the best possible PC build out there, but about a year ago, it still pretty much was. And to me, it has the best components that I could have asked for at the time. So it has a Ryzen 9 5950X and a RTX 3090 in it. Now, if you would build a system similar to this today using marketplace or secondhand parts, you would still be looking at a cost of about 2,000 Canadian loonies for the total cost of the system. Now, this system right here is running an AMD FX 6300 from 2012 and a Radeon R7 360 from almost 10 years ago now. And at the time that these components were released, they were still considered to be low to mid-range components 10 years ago. Now, the only real positive of the system right here is, obviously besides the RGB, is the fact that it has 32 gigabytes of Ripjaw RAM running at 1600 megahertz DDR3. Now, of course, there's also the best piece of the system, which is an optical drive, which actually had a copy of Microsoft Office 2007 in there, and I have no idea how long it's been in there. Now, this system, if you'd want to build it today using parts off Marketplace or eBay, would probably cost you anywhere between 100 to 150 US dollars. Now, there was a time where this system would offer you really solid performance for the time at a really budget conscious price, still being considered low to mid range at the time. Now the question is, does she still have some life left in her to game, or is it time to put her to rest?
Nice.
I just wanted to test this out and see what can we expect from a system this old. And my biggest worry is the fact that the video card only has 2 gigabytes of VRAM, which I think is going to be an issue in some of the games that we're going to test, especially in 2024. Now, obviously, I won't be trying to test something like Cyberpunk 2077 or Starfield, because I figure with the 2 gigabytes of VRAM that this GPU has, if I try to test those games, I'm pretty sure the system would just explode. Now, before getting deeper in this video, guys, I would appreciate it if you stuck around so far to hit that subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment if you have any questions. But let's push this system through a few tests and see what it can muster up with a few benchmarks, a few gaming old games, newer games, and let's see how it handles. So let's start with a quick Cinevent to see what score we get with the FX 6300. And after letting it run, we ended up with a pretty respectable score of almost 2400. But most surprising to me was the fact that one, we finished the test, but two, even with a stock little tiny AMD fan cooler here, we never got above 62 degrees Celsius, which was pretty surprising to me because if I recall, the FX series of processors ran pretty hot. So I wanted to run a good variety of games. Obviously, some esports titles, older games that predate this system, but a few games that came out after this system would have been built, just to get a good variety of what this system could do. So first off, let's start with a classic. Let's start with Counter-Strike or Counter-Strike 2 at this point and see how it could handle. And I was actually surprised. I thought it would have handled this game much better, seeing how CS or Counter-Strike, CSGO, whatever, used to run pretty well on even the simplest of laptop. And I don't know if it's a setting issue. We were able to run on low settings at 1080p with AMD super resolution set to quality, and we were able to churn out that 60 FPS, getting up to 80 FPS. But I felt like it should be getting more for a game like Counter-Strike. And although it was hitting the 60 FPS while playing, it felt a bit sluggish and it was kind of choppy here and there. So I don't know if it was a setting issue with the system, but Counter-Strike is usually fairly easy to run. Maybe Counter-Strike 2 needs to be better optimized. I'm not sure with older systems, but it wasn't the most pleasant game to run, but it did run at about 60 FPS. Now let's move on to another esports title, which is much newer than Counter-Strike, Valorant. Now this seemed to be a lot easier to run for the system. On high settings at 1080p, we were getting around 90 FPS on average. And on low settings, we were easily above the 100 FPS, even going into 120 FPS. So a system like this could easily play a game like Valorant, and if you have a high refresh rate monitor, it'd actually be able to take advantage of it, which was surprising. So we've kind of done two esports games so far, Counter-Strike, which wasn't the best, and Valorant, which ran surprisingly well. So let's jump into Fortnite and see what we can expect from there. Now, we have to understand that Fortnite has had a lot of updates, and now in 2024, this is the season 2 or whatever the most up-to-date thing is. I kind of stopped playing after the Fortnite OG. But sticking with 1080p on low settings and performance mode, we fluttered around that 50, 60 FPS mark, which isn't top tier, and it shows that the system is pretty resilient to the most popular Battle Royale game, and it was able to play it. But obviously, if you lower your resolution to something like 900p, you'll probably get a better average frame rate. The only thing is with games like Fortnite is it wasn't smooth, kind of like the same thing as Counter-Strike. I wasn't seeing it to be a very fluid game, even at 60 FPS, really low quality. It wasn't a fantastic experience. It is playable, but not ideal for a competitive game like that. Now, before we jump into the more demanding games, let's take a look at some really good games that would predate this system. So games that would have come out before 2012, 2015-ish, around the time that somebody would have built a system like this. So it should perform extremely well in those games, and that's kind of what we saw. So in Deus Ex Human Revolution, which released in 2011, it was a breeze for the system. It was easily hitting 90 to 100 FPS on full settings, which is always good to see. And obviously a fun little rage-inducing game that is not hard to run at all is Cuphead. Now, Cuphead is going to run like butter at 60 FPS on a system like this at 1080p. Don't judge me on the gameplay. I was using a keyboard for the first time in Cuphead. I was too lazy to get up and go get a controller. But trust me, here's actually a couple clips of me playing Cuphead with a controller and not faring much better.
No, the chicken drumstick!
Okay, so we'll get into some more demanding games, which are much older than I initially thought when I was testing this system. But you know what? Let's see what they could do with the right settings. It should still push the system to its knees if we would put the right settings. But I just wanted to go for like a stable playable. If I could get a 60 FPS, that'd be great. But something playable. Anywhere above 30 is obviously playable at this point on a system like this. So let's see what we could get. The most surprising part about testing Grand Theft Auto is we're going to test GTA 5, which is still the most relevant Grand Theft Auto that there is. And this game came out in 2013, believe it or not, about 2 years before this GPU was released. So it should hold up fairly well. And honestly, it does. At 1080p, I was surprised. Running the in-game benchmark, obviously at low settings or normal settings, we were hitting the average of 60 FPS with a mix of normal and low settings. And if we bump the settings a bit higher to include some high settings, the in-game benchmark was running at about 30 FPS. So not ideal, but if you do want to get a bit better textures, it's still technically playable. I would still bump it down to low resolution just to make sure you get a steady 60 FPS. Now let's jump into a game that came out in 2015, which is still considered a fantastic game, and it still looks amazing and beautiful in 2024, and that is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, still one of my favorite games. Now, a game like The Witcher 3 has always been pretty interesting because it would really push systems to its limits back like about a few years ago. It was kind of like the benchmark of what could it get in The Witcher 3 at 1440p, at 4K, at 1080p. And that was kind of the game that was really used to judge and value the dollar per performance for GPUs, like when the 10 series came out and stuff. We could see at 1080p on low settings, we do get that 30 FPS, which is kind of okay, borderline playable, but realistically, I would lower it to 1440 by 900p on low to start getting into that 50, 60 FPS range, which makes it much more manageable, much more enjoyable to play, and much more smoother. So if you're willing to handle lower quality, lower resolution, but to get a better playable frame rate, then it is technically possible to play The Witcher 3 on a system like this. Now, finally, I wanted to see how it fares on a newer title, also from Rockstar, which I thought was newer than it is. I cannot believe that we are now in the 5th year since Red Dead Redemption 2 came out, and it still feels like it's a game that is still considered one of the best games ever. It is still graphically intense. That's going to push systems to its knees. And to be honest, even when I play it on my system on ultra settings at ultra wide 1440p, I'm not even maxing out the refresh rate at 165 Hz of my monitor. So it just goes to show you that it's a very demanding game, even for something like an RTX 3090. And it did come out in 2019, but I did still want to test it on the system. And compared to the specs of this PC, Red Dead 2 is a real heavyweight. And right off the bat, we were presented with a major challenge since I knew it was going to happen, but the VRAM of the GPU wouldn't even allow me to set the resolution of the game to 1080p in the menu. So I knew we were in for a treat when I saw that the VRAM exceeded 2 gigabytes just to set it to 1080p. So I was able to set it at 1050p on low settings just to stay under the 2 gigabyte threshold that the Radeon R7 360 allows for. And as you can see from the in-game benchmark, we were still able to get an average of 37 FPS. But once we drop it down to 900p, we were able to get at least that steady 40 FPS, which I think is the sweet spot for this system. Playing a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, you're playing a single-player game, you don't need to have high FPS. 40 FPS on a system like this to be able to play a game like Red Dead is actually really impressive. I was surprised that it was able to run this game. It did finish the Firestrike score with a score of 3,929, graphics score of 4573, physics score of 5985, combined score of 1529, for a final score of 3929 with the Radeon R7, which is actually above the average for this system. Cool.
And to be honest, that was what was the most surprising thing to me, was the fact that the system was able to play these games. When I first took this system, by the way, this wasn't a system I went out to get. It was actually at my parents' house that they used to use, but since upgrade them to a little laptop that they could use all around the house. So I figured I'm going to take the system and I'm going to see what it could do. But my first thought was, hey, it has a 12-year-old processor and a GPU from an era before we really saw an advancement in GPUs, right? Before the 9s, before the 10 series of graphics card. But I wasn't expecting the system to run anything at all or run it fairly well at all. I was expecting it to be able to run games like Portal, Portal 2, and maybe go back and play my favorite game of Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun. But besides that, I wasn't expecting much from this PC, so I was actually incredibly surprised. Now, the R7, the Radeon R7 360 and the FX 6300 are from an era of PC building or computer gaming that has come and gone, right? I'm not suggesting that anybody go out and build this system in 2024 to play games today, unless the goal is to really just have a computer at the house and run a few games. If you're gonna go back and build an older system, go back to like Coffee Lake, go back, which is the 8th gen Intel, go back to the 9th gen Intel, go to like Ryzen 3, you'll get a much better system and it's not going to be much more expensive. I think I saw like Ryzen, like the 3700X going for like 80 bucks, just the processor. So you could probably build a really good system able to handle gaming, 1080p gaming really well for $400 or $500. So I would definitely say go that route instead of building a system that's 12 years old. But the real reason I wanted to see how this PC handles games in 2024 is because we are constantly shown the newest, latest, and greatest piece of hardware, right? Everybody wants a 4090, everyone wants a 4080 Super, everybody wants a 7800X 3D in their system, everybody wants to build these $5,000 systems. Even a system as old as this, if it could still handle games, you do not need to upgrade your components every generation. And trust me, I get how tempting it is to upgrade your system. I'm looking at new components daily, but I'm not always pulling the trigger on them. So that'll do for this one, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please remember to hit that like, subscribe button, and I will catch you guys next time.